start the recording.
Got it. There we go.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, David, would you like to introduce yourself for everybody?
Thank you, Julie. My name is David Votta. I'm the owner of Votta Sales and Lettings, a little modest agency down in the southeast tip of Kent and a place called Thanet. So I say to people, if you don't know where that is, it's opposite Belgium, just in the British Isles. And yeah, we've been trading for about 4 years this year, actually. And I decided to set up my own company several years ago after working for different organisations and seeing where they were going wrong. I'm also going to be president of ARLA in a month and a half as well. So that is going to keep me very occupied, Julie.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So my name is Julie Ford. For those of you who don't know me, I run a company called Gothard Row, and I predominantly help landlords with problem tenants. I help find grants, legacies and trusts for the tenants to apply for so that their rent arrears can be paid. Landlord's got the money in the back pocket where it should be, and tenant doesn't have the threat of eviction and debt hanging over their head. Now, the reason I have asked David to come along and speak with me today is because I have been approached by more and more landlords who are looking to disinstruct their letting agent, but are causing problems with this from the start. So it seems that the terms of businesses aren't set out correctly, and landlords are experiencing more and more problems with the agent saying it's just not possible to disinstruct them. So we're going to be talking about that situation today, and hopefully we would have been able to answer all of your questions. But if there are any things that we haven't covered and you do have queries, do come back to David and I, and we'd be more than happy to help you. So I think before we get started on how to disinstruct an agent, I think the real key point here is how do you choose the right agent, and making sure that we're getting value for money out of these letting agents rather than just paying our 10-15% property management fee and really all they're doing is collecting the rent. So David, from your point of view as an active agent, what would you say are the key points to getting the right agent in place in the first place?
There's a number of things really, Julie. I mean, it's quite an interesting one. Most people, especially when you look on these forums, as you know, they'll say, get 6 agents out, pick, you know, everybody's an expert, aren't they? Pick the cheapest one, pick the one that's got this. It's got to feel right with you. So I think first and foremost, it's relationships. So you've got to like the person you're going to be dealing with, as well as trust them. Now, some people say, I don't have to like the agent, they've got to be good. Yeah, there's value in that, but you've got to like the people and the company you're dealing with, as well as the integrity and ethos. Because if they don't treat their staff very well, you imagine how they're going to treat you as a landlord. So that's one thing. Also, I'm very big on Google reviews, because I think Google reviews you can't escape. So if you've been a naughty boy or a naughty girl, you know, Google will show that. So you've got other ones where you can choose bits and pieces. So look at their Google reviews. You know, if they're averaging out 4 or 5 stars, anything like that, that's a good pointer. Usually what works quite a lot is when you put it in these forums that you can put, can anyone recommend an agent in this area? And you'll see a load of people that come in and they tell you who they don't recommend and then who they do. So there's a variety of ways. And also, what does their company say about them? Do they look after people? But also, there's some important checkpoints as well, Julie. So with, as you know, a lot of agents, they are subject to what we call client money protection. And for those landlords watching that are not sure, it's basically your money is protected by an accredited company, and it's, you know, it's ring fenced. And if that company ever goes bust, you get your money back and not pennies to the pound. So it came a law, I think it was back in 2016, I think it got passed through 2017. And this is a legal requirement. And part of those requirements is they have to display their client money protection provider and where it's held and all that stuff. So it's about compliance. There's certain checkpoints you've got to look at. And I spoke to a client I was dealing with for the past 6 months, deliberating on letting his property, and he decided to go with an agent that offered him 5% for full management, and he overvalued the property by £400 a month. This is a 1-bedroom flat in an area that commands 775, and he's put it on at 995. He originally started at 1,050. So don't be fooled is another thing. Everybody wants to hear that their property is the best one in the street and the most valuable, but we've got to be realistic. So I could go on forever, Julie, sorry.
That's quite all right. And those are some really, really important points. I think for me as well, working with landlords and letting agents who have problem tenants, I think for me, key is for the letting agent to acknowledge that the client is the landlord, but the customer is their tenant. And understanding that they're actually not in the property business, they're in customer service, is for me a big green tick in the box for a good agency to understand the differences between those two relationships. So let's have a talk about dis-instructing one of these wonderful agents. We've both had experiences with landlords that have struggled to get out of contracts with our letting agents. So what do we do when we've signed the terms and conditions that we haven't really read, because who reads it? You know, we all sign on the dotted line, and it turns out there's actually no cancellation or termination clause in that terms of business with the agent. What do we do? How do we get out of this? Or are we stuck with this letting agent till the end of time?
End of time. Well, this is the good thing, and a lot of people will panic. And I've had it with clients that have had a poor service and they want to come over and like, I'm scared, what do I do? And I literally send them a template email on what to do. So it defaults to the statutory position of contract regulation, and where, you know, if that agent is within breach and you're well within your rights to exercise a certain period. It's what you've got to imagine is if you're sitting in front of a judge and the judge would say what is reasonable. So if you're going in front of the judge and you're saying, right, the agent in their terms of business say they would collect and process the rent within 5 working days, they've been holding on to it, they've not notified me of arrears, they've not returned calls, you know, they're breaching the Ombudsman Code of Practice. And if you can wholeheartedly find these breaches and these problems, then you can, I think you can end it through frustration. They frustrate the contract because they're not honouring their obligations within. And the trouble is, Julie, like you mentioned, who reads your terms of business? But it's so important that you do, because I mean, it will take you an hour, but there might be certain clauses in there where they state they don't do certain things, like they might not do a routine inspection for 8 months instead of 3 or 4. So it's about doing that, carefully looking over it, making sure you got the right decision, and just going from there. So to get them out, it's about, I mean, I'm not saying all landlords should get rid of their agent, but by all means, if they're in breach and they're not providing the service that you signed up to, then you need to exercise that, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So that moves us on then to, obviously, the letting agent doesn't want to be dis-instructed. They don't want to lose that business. That makes perfect sense. No business wants to lose customers. So
No.
What about these agents that are telling landlords that they just can't be dis-instructed? The tenant is theirs and they will evict the tenant should you dis-instruct the agent. Where does the landlord stand with that?
Well, again, it defaults to statutory position. You know, how can they honour that? They can say, well, our contract with you says that. Okay, well, let's look at the Unfair Terms and Consumer Contract Regulations of 1999, replaced by the Consumer Rights Act of 2015. There's so many things that default to that position. So they could write in a contract, Julie, every Tuesday you've got to go to the local zoo and paint a monkey blue. Doesn't mean that that's enforceable. And I use the example with my landlord clients. Look, you can put whatever you want into that AST, but if it's non-enforceable, then let's not put it in. It's like me saying, Julie, you can drive my car and I'm going to loan it to you, and you can drive through London Central. And although it says 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour speed limit, your contract with me says you can do 60. And then you get pulled over by the police, and the High Road Traffic Act, which is a statutory instrument, would state, actually, you can only do 20, but David's contract says I can do 60. Well, that's null and void. So it's about getting that clarity, really.
I think also it needs to be understood about gaining possession. So obviously a letting agent, yes, they can serve notice on behalf of their client landlord, but the judge is not going to award possession to the letting agent because the letting agent never had possession of that property in the first place. Exactly. So its possession can only go back to the person who's legally entitled to possess it. So regardless of what letting agents are saying that they will evict your tenant, actually legally they can't, because the judge won't award possession of a property that is not theirs.
Yeah.
Moving on from that as well, I've heard lots of landlords say that the letting agents who are being dis-instructed are talking about wanting cancellation fees. Now, obviously, cancellation fees, yes, we understand that. And if it's in the terms of business, of course, you've signed it, you've got to agree to it. But we're hearing more and more of these kind of being made up on the spot. I spoke to a landlord a couple of weeks ago. The agency had nothing in their terms of business about a cancellation fee and said, well, you need to pay a year's fees up front before we will agree to be dis-instructed.
Crikey.
So yeah, absolutely. So realistically, a landlord's going to say, why do I need to pay that and then not get a service? So of course they then don't dis-instruct, they stay with the agent because they're going to end up paying out the same amount of money. Where does a landlord stand when they're being asked to pay up these fees in regards to cancelling a contract when the contract is silent?
It's unfair, isn't it? You can't, like you say, you can't make it up as you go along. And Julie, there's some incredible agents across the country, and I get to see a lot of them. They're fantastic. But then it's like anything. There is, and this is what we're specifically talking about, the bad ones, isn't it? That are not providing service. So that's the whole point of this, because it's good and bad and everything. But you can't request a year's. I mean, my cancellation is give us 3 months notice. If you're, I mean, not blowing my own trumpet, we don't really have landlords leave us unless they want to sell, because they're happy, they get the service, or they have to move back in. So we have a 3 month, you can either give us 3 months notice, or you can give us 3 months management fee, and you can take it back straight away. And that's the option. And I did actually tell a lie, lose one recently. He was a multi-landlord, and he wanted to cut down on the fees that he paid, and he's gone with another unaccredited agent that doesn't display client money protection, that still advertises tenant fees, and he's gone to them and he says, well, they're a portfolio landlord like me and they feel my pain, because our contractors are accredited to a certain standard and they're local contractors, but he wants to get his mates in, and we're not allowing that because public liability, professional indemnity. We've got a duty of care to our customer, like you say, the tenant. So it's, yeah, I think it's got to be what's fair and balanced. And usually a lot of these terms and conditions are based off a core template, and 3 months is the usual. If any agent's saying 12 months or the term of the tenancy, because we found the tenant, no, actually you've paid your setup costs to find the tenant, you're paying for the ongoing management. If that ongoing management is failing, then you have the right to cancel, really. That's my belief. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, however, that's my interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. And just picking up on what you said there about your landlords tend to leave when they're selling a property. Yeah. Now, where does the new owner stand in this situation? So again, I've had this direct experience from a landlord that I'm working with. They purchased the property. The property was being managed by an agent, a high street national. Obviously, in my opinion, I think when the property is sold, the agency's terms of business end with the seller. However, this particular purchaser was being hounded by the letting agent and being told that you've purchased a property that we manage, therefore we carry on managing it, and wouldn't allow the purchaser to self-manage or move on to another agent. So again, where do we stand with that?
Well, the contract's not with the property, it's with the agent, isn't it? Pure and simple. So that's the thing. I mean, we had one where he was buying it and he was self-managing. We said, that's fine. We assume this as your notice that once the property is completed in 3 to 4 months, whenever it was, we would then end our management. And we volunteered that. As the agent, have a bit of integrity and say, look, obviously he doesn't want to use us. We've tried our pitch. It's not worked. He's a self-managing landlord. That's fine. Go and then move on. The trouble you find, Julia, with a lot of these agents that are not doing what they're supposed to, the moment that they get this instruction email or whatever it is, they start kicking into gear. And for me, that doesn't show the quality of the agent. You should always be looking after your customers, your clients, you know, and to be jumping through hoops when you know you're going to lose the business, it just shows bad taste, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's to do with being reactive rather than proactive.
Yes.
I do see a lot of letting agents, like you say, they're just sitting there waiting for something to happen, but then maybe not going about it in the right way of how to resolve those issues. I mean, especially if you've got a tenant with rent arrears or antisocial behaviour. I tend to find agents are frightened to pick up the phone these days. They want to do everything by WhatsApp or email. Great ways to communicate, but sometimes just picking up the phone and hearing someone's tone of voice can make all the difference.
Yes, because you imagine an email can be sent. Like I've been guilty of it. I've sent emails to people before and they've said, oh, that was a bit harsh, because I'm usually very fun and vibrant and the email's been very business. And they're like, were you angry? I said, no, I was just giving you the facts. I was like, oh, sorry. And that's the thing. So I tend to, you know, we're a stickler for notes on the system. So as soon as we have a conversation with someone, we just spoke to Julie, we've updated them that we're doing viewings on this day, and just to let you know, you'll receive 6 or 7 email notifications that you've got 6 or 7 viewings. It's all about picking up the phone, having a chat, and the personal touch. I think, like you say, we're in a techie age, right? People are too busy doing that, as opposed to pick up the phone, let's have a chat with Julie, you know. And I like it because obviously my role is to run the organisation, but I still take the properties on, so I'm still very hands-on, and I'll go and meet Julie, build rapport, you know, tell her what we're going to do, and then, you know, next time it comes up for rent, I'll have a chat. Or if they say, David, I've got a bit of a complex situation, Julie, just to let you know, we're on the case, you know, lovely to talk to you. You rekindle that love for each other, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that's maybe sometimes where it's lost in translation, because I know for a fact, when you are sending a text or sending an email, it doesn't matter what mindset you are in when it is sent, but how the person who's receiving it mindset is how they read that email or that text message. So if they're upset or they're angry, they're going to read it as being sent in an upset or angry manner. And I think, again, picking up that phone and hearing someone's tone of voice is just so important to breaking down those barriers.
Yeah, especially if it's bad news you've got to deliver, you know. It's always good to have it in a softly approach.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that our landlords are finding when they're trying to dis-instruct agents is the deposit is being held to ransom. So many of these dis-instructed agents are refusing to pass over the deposit to the landlords and claiming they've protected it and they must keep it protected. Now, yes, we know deposits must be protected, absolutely. But can they really hold a tenant's deposit to ransom, or must they hand it over to the landlord?
If the tenant wants to, in the eyes of the law, as you know, it's the tenant's money. So the tenant will pay over that money. It goes into what it should do, go into the deposit protection scheme, you know, serve the relevant notices and all that. It's there. So when you end management, you can say, right, okay, if you are dis-instructing landlord, you'll go to the agent, right, Julie, I've created a deposit ID and I've set this up. Depends if you use an insurance-backed scheme or a custodial scheme. You know, custodial, you have to just confirm that it's all set up. Insurance-backed, you really want to see receipt of the monies. So if I have a landlord that says, yeah, I'm going to protect the deposit for an insurance-backed scheme, okay, well, show us evidence of where it's been protected, because you still have a duty of care to that tenant to say, right, okay, your landlord's taking over the management, they want to use their scheme, because what you don't want to do is do that, and then they go, oh, crikey, he's done a runner with my money. There's no client money protection, it's not really insured. So it's a case of, I always use the phrase that if you're in court and you say your honour at the end of it, oh, I did protect it. Oh no, I just handed the deposit to the owner, your honour. And then you think, actually, crikey, no, I did just hand it over. I didn't check. I didn't do this. So as an agent, you have to protect yourself. So it's not the fact that, you know, you can't do it. It's just, it's the will of the, and you've got to get agreement from tenant and landlord. So you've got to get the tenant to say, look, I'm happy for you to transfer my deposit. So as soon as you do that, the landlord is bound by the deposit protection regulations, and the 30-day time limit starts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's just understanding the legislation that we have out there, and for landlords themselves, which is why they use the property professionals, the agents. You know, we've currently got 168 pieces of legislation and 402 regulations. It's a lot to get your head around on a daily basis.
You've been counting, haven't you?
I have. So obviously it's a lot to get your head around, but I do think it's a landlord's responsibility to know the basics, and deposit protection and how to serve notice and ASTs should really be top of landlords' to-do lists. So from your experience, what have your landlords, not your personal landlords, but the landlords that you've been supporting, what experience have they been having with trying to get away from the agents that they've been using?
I've had some very interesting ones where the agents said exactly that. We're not handing over this, we're not doing that. And then all I do is I just write the template of this is what we need, this is what you've got to do. I've taken specialist legal advice on the matter, and if you can, and just go back and just, it's about being honest and upfront. If the agent has genuinely done something wrong, then by all means you can say, look, we've got a contract, you failed this, I've been offered from another agent, or I'm going to self-manage, because I mean, it's funny. I shouldn't maybe say it on this call, but I worry when a lot of landlords self-manage, because it's a flipping full-time job, you know. And like you said, 168 regulations. It's just bizarre. It's very hard to keep up with. And every time I go to a legal conference or seminar, I'm writing stuff down, thinking I need to change and get with the times with this one. So it's very difficult, because there are, like, you've got the National Resident Landlords Association. They've got 90,000 members. They're the biggest landlord organisation. Brilliant. They do webinars, seminars and all that. That's great. But then if landlords want the ability of a full-time job, which it pretty much is, because you want to keep notes on everything. Oh, I just had a chat with my tenant. Well, I text her. I got it on text. That's fine. Okay, but what else can you evidence? Have you got the audit log? I mean, not without going on too long, I took on a landlord last year, really lovely guy, and you know, he wasn't a bad landlord, but he was getting too busy with his work to take calls from his tenants, and he only had one property. He set the tenancy up in April 2021. He didn't protect the deposit within the 30-day window. He took more than a 5-week deposit, so he breached the Tenant Fees Act, and he didn't have an electrical installation condition report. So I worked it out. If he was caught and it went to court, he would look at £38,000 in fines. And recently I was helping a client out who, we got it on the BBC News South East, where a tenant, the landlord dis-instructed the agent and had the agreement with the tenant because they got on. The tenant then manipulated. This is a guy in his 90s, Julie. He's terminally ill with cancer as well. He didn't pay rent for 2 years, which was £800 a month. He sublet the property for £400 a month. So he's 1,200 quid a month up. And then he was collecting waste for people and charging them, and then dumping it at the property and burning it, instead of getting rid of it through what waste tippers do. Then we cottoned onto it. He stopped burning it. He left the property. There's £20,200 worth of arrears. There's £6,000 worth of legal fees. That's before the landlord refurbs the inside. He's only got 10 grand to play with. So it would just be a case of get it done properly. If you're worried about the regulations and keeping up, use an agent that's accredited, that's approved. And also get rent guarantee and legal cover. Crikey, for the cost of a Chinese takeaway a month, you can underwrite your rent for the monthly, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I would always advise a landlord who isn't going to invest their full time into managing their property to use an agent, because at the end of the day, the agency is doing that as their full-time job, and it's all they do and all they know. So they're doing it on a daily basis. And like you say, keeping up to date with the legislation is just a minefield in itself. I've been in this industry 28 years, and for me, every day is still a school day. I am still learning something. I'm like, why did I not know that?
Yeah, so, you kick yourself.
And that's with us working in the industry on a daily basis. So landlords who aren't in it, churning it up daily, they are going to miss things. And unfortunately, as you've already said, when it comes to fines and penalties, some of those can be horrendous when it comes to £30,000 fines, but some of them also hold criminal records as well.
Yeah,
so
they do.
Landlords could find themselves inadvertently being criminals without realizing it.
Yeah, rogue database, they might never be able to let a property again, all because they missed their gas safety or something simple. You know, we're all human, we all make mistakes, but some mistakes are really costly. And that's why, you know, and I years ago when I was working in an agency, I met this chief superintendent who's really high up in the police, and he wanted us as the managing agent. I said, that's great. He said, yeah, look, I just want you to take care of it. I don't want anything to do with it. Just let me know when you need me. Because he said, whenever I go onto a crime scene, I don't get the marigolds on, I get forensics in, because they're the experts. And I live by that. It really is a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, David. I really appreciate it. And I hope that we've answered all of the questions out there that landlords have, and also agents have as well, to understand better how they can manage their clients and their customers. So thank you very much for your time today. And it's been great.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.